Welcome to Passport to Everywhere with Indagare's Melissa Biggs-Bradley.
Melissa is the founder and CEO of Indagare, a travel and media company committed to inspiring and empowering people to change their lives and the world through travel, while having a positive impact on the places they visit. On the show, Melissa will transport you to dream destinations, share the latest travel news and trends, and introduce you to the most extraordinary people she has met on the road.
That's really what life is. It's like one big design project. So learning about what's going on in all these other places, it just makes you a more informed citizen of the world.
Follow her behind the scenes to the world's most legendary hotels and join us as she explores the future of travel.
Today I'm joined by the celebrated Japanese-American designer Trina Turk, who you may have heard mentioned in a previous episode during my conversation with Jonathan Adler. Trina is a Californian at heart, and she's created a luxurious, vibrant brand inspired by the sunny Golden State landscape. From its beginnings as a women's contemporary line in 1995, her namesake label, Trina Turk, has transformed into a signature print and color-focused lifestyle brand. With 11 annual collections, Trina Turk offers women's clothing, accessories, swimwear, eyewear, paper goods, home goods, and even a Mr. Turk menswear line, which was founded by her late husband, designer and photographer, Jonathan Scow. Trina's vision draws from her time in Los Angeles, Palm Springs, the Sea Ranch, as well as from her travels all over the globe. She loves vintage shopping, finding inspiration from her discoveries in new destinations, and designing her boutiques with travel in mind. Her first retail store opened in Palm Springs in 2002, and she's expanded nationwide since. In 2020, her book titled Trina Turk was published, featuring her restored home projects and colorful mid-century inspired aesthetic. As an active philanthropist, she goes beyond the fashion industry by supporting arts, education, and architectural preservation causes. Trina is a modern trendsetter, mixing classic American style with her love of California. I'm excited to explore how travel fuels her inspiration and how her brand's distinct synergy is created when high quality meets carefree glamour.
Join Melissa on the journey. You're listening to Passport to Everywhere. Here's your host, Melissa Biggs-Bradley.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to talk to you about fashion and travel and California and sunshine and all sorts of things that are associated with your brand and your life. I would love to start by just learning how you knew that you wanted to become a fashion designer, how early it was, what inspired you to enter into fashion.
The thing that really got me going on fashion was when my mom taught me how to sew. And she was an excellent seamstress. And this is in the early 70s. I was 11. And she taught me how to sew. And then pretty soon after that, taught me how you could manipulate the purchased patterns, you know, the Simplicity or McCall's patterns. And once she showed me that that was possible, I realized that, you know, it was a huge thing to explore. And that's really what got me hooked. I mean, I did drive her crazy as a very young child about, you know, regarding what I would and would not wear. So I think that might have been an early indication, and she didn't really know what was going on. But yeah, once she taught me how to sew, that was pretty much it. I decided I'm going to be a fashion designer, although I did not really realize what that entailed.
And you grew up in California, right?
I grew up in California and also in Washington State, in Bellevue, Washington. But most of my life has been in California.
Okay. So you fell in love with design and fashion. You obviously learned to sew and to create your own things. Talk to me a little bit about how you started your own label and the approach you took to creating your first line.
I worked for other companies as a designer for 12 years before starting my own company, and that was in 1995. And since I had worked primarily in the junior market, I really never actually wore the clothes that I was designing. So my main motivation, or one of the main motivations, was to create something that I wanted to wear. And to also, I think I also had an entrepreneurial streak and just wanted to see if I could do it. and I was 34 when I started the company. So I just was sort of thinking, well, if I'm gonna do it, I better try it now. And, worst case scenario is if it doesn't work out, I'll have a great portfolio that I can then move into another area of the business and not do design juniors anymore.
Starting your own line at 34 is a pretty big leap to make, and it worked. So what were some of the sort of lessons and also the challenges that you overcame?
I think that one of the best things I had going for me was just utter naivete about what it exactly entailed. I never did a business plan. And I think that perhaps if I had done a business plan, it would have been so daunting that it would have just convinced me not to do it. I was really surprised that a lot of my friends and associates who had worked within the industry were not super supportive about it. They were like, oh no, that's crazy. It's so difficult. And I just thought, well, I just have to try it. So I think that the biggest challenge really was just figuring out everything other than design. I went into it thinking that I knew everything after 12 years of working in the industry. And I did know design and merchandising primarily. I knew a little bit about production, but there's these huge areas that I knew nothing about: the whole financial side, the shipping and logistics side, and as far as like more detailed in terms of like getting stuff produced. So I really just kind of dealt with each thing as it came to me. And I realized that I wasn't as knowledgeable as I thought I was going in. But, I was able to sort of cross each bridge as it came to it. And it worked out. The first few years, though, were completely crazy. And just because of how much I didn't know.
And so in those first few years, was there a point at which you knew, okay, this is actually going to work and I've crossed all of those bridges and we've got something?
Well, the very first collection that I did, it was really small. It was maybe 20 pieces. It was really brightly colored silk dupioni. And we did a lot of kind of photographic floral prints, like huge, giant placed florals. And that just resonated. And I was able to get into Saks and Barney's and Fred Segal with that very first collection. And so that initial collection, I was very lucky that it was accepted by those retailers who were important retailers at the time. And, it kind of just kept building on that. But I think that the thing that was important about the first collection is that color was a very important element. And that's still a really important element of our collection today.
Are there elements that have changed in terms of your design process?
Yeah, I think that as the business grows, people look to you for certain things. And, of course, we're known for print and color. And so as your business grows, I think that oftentimes a customer will come to you and ask you to make something specific for them, which we have done many times over the years. And that may or may not be something that I would wear personally. I think that as the business grew and as the collection grew, you're really catering more to your clientele.
Yeah. And I know your late husband was involved with you in the business and played a very important role in that. So that too made the business personal because it was something you guys did together. Can you talk a little bit about what was wonderful about that, but also how it's changed?
Well, at the very beginning, when I first started the company, I was working out of our house in Los Feliz in Los Angeles. And Jonathan, my late husband, was a fashion stylist at the time. And he was always involved in the business sort of peripherally in those early years. But honestly, we didn't really become profitable for about 4 years. So he was working really hard as a fashion stylist and essentially paying the bills while I was trying to launch this thing. And he was always involved in the aesthetics of the company. And in the late 90s, when he transitioned from being a fashion stylist to becoming a fashion photographer, he started to do all of the photography for the company. And that involved not only the photography, but locations, casting, set design. He had done a lot of production design while he was styling. And so he sort of took on that whole thing. And I think that those early photographs really had a lot to do with sort of the DNA of the brand. You know, we shot all around Southern California. We shot a lot in Palm Springs. And we shot a lot at mid-century modern architectural homes. And so I think that Jonathan's vision through the photographs really established kind of the look of the brand. And then at some point, I think it was in the sort of early 2000s, he started designing Mr. Turk, which was our menswear collection. And when I first met him, we were both studying apparel design, but so he did have a design background, but then switched to marketing. And so hadn't really been a designer in his career, but, you know, he loved clothing as much as I did and had an idea of what Mr. Turk would be and sort of launched that and designed that until he died.
I know you still have Mr. Turk. Are there other ways he still influences the brand?
Well, I think that there was a sort of a element of surprise in Mr. Turk. You know, he was always sort of trying to push the edges on what menswear was. And I think that it's sort of, now there's a lot more gender fluidity in apparel. And, you know, we have women who buy our men's clothing and men who buy our women's clothing, and it doesn't really matter. But I think that Jonathan was part of sort of establishing that kind of idea. And also just through the photography and the images, you know, the brand is very optimistic. And I think that that optimism is something that's still very important. That was part of, you know, his vision.
Yeah. And the brand is also, in my mind, so associated with California and especially Los Angeles. And you talked about the places that he would shoot campaigns that probably contributed to it. But it definitely has a different fashion aesthetic and almost role of fashion than other capitals. You know, LA is obviously more casual and I think optimistic, as you said, than a place like, you know, Paris, which might be a little bit more formal and maybe more reserved than optimistic. So I'm curious, how do you feel that the California lifestyle and landscape, you know, influences the brand?
Well, growing up here and living here for most of my life, it's just part of my reality. And I think that the climate and the landscape and also the architecture has just sort of seeped in. You know, I grew up in California in the 60s and the 70s, which was a very colorful time in both fashion and interiors. And so somehow I think that that has just, you know, been in my head the whole time. And, you know, going back and forth from LA to Palm Springs, I think that there's sort of like micro cultures everywhere you go. And in Southern California, there's surf culture, there's car culture, there's, you know, actually a really big sort of aesthetic difference between the high desert, you know, Joshua Tree and Yucca Valley and that whole area, and Palm Springs. And so I just think that there's an endless supply of inspiration, really, you know, just in California.
I can only imagine what it would be like to grow up there, having been a New Yorker my whole life. But in some ways, I think that's part of the appeal of your brand and also of the state of California, is there's this romance around the destinations of California that really speaks to people who aren't from there. There's an iconography and a dreaminess that is connected, whether it's Joshua Tree or it's the Hollywood Hills. There's this sense of possibility in the California landscapes. Do you have favorite destinations within the state? And I'd love to hear why.
Oh, wow. I mean, I could go on for a long time. I mean, obviously, I love Los Angeles. I love the energy and the diversity of Los Angeles. I've lived here since 1985, and the city's definitely evolved, but I find it very exciting. And I mean, I love New York too, but it's so different from New York. I think that Los Angeles is maybe a little bit less bound by tradition than New York. And so there's a sort of a freeness and a spontaneity here that we take for granted, but I think it's just part of the culture. I have a little place up at the Sea Ranch, which is on the Mendocino coast, north of the Bay Area. It's about a 3-hour drive from the Bay Area. It's pretty remote. It's a very rocky, dramatic, almost Big Sur-like coastline, which is another amazing, part of California. Of course, I love the desert. And as I mentioned, there's been a lot of interest in the high desert, which is, Morongo Valley, Yucca Valley, 29 Palms, that whole area. For a while, when, we were going back and forth to Palm Springs, we would go to Joshua Tree occasionally, but I would say in the past 10 years, there's been this sort of explosion of interest in the high desert. And I don't know if that's because of Instagram or exactly why, but I love how there's a distinctly different culture in the high desert versus the Palm Springs area. I went on an architectural tour in La Jolla, which was incredibly beautiful and almost surreal. It reminded me a bit of Santa Barbara, which is another seaside town that has, a lot of beautiful Spanish colonial revival architecture.
You made me want to go to all of them. I am actually curious because I have been to Palm Springs, but I haven't been to Joshua Tree. You said there's a big difference between the two of them. How would you sort of describe the different aesthetics?
Well, I mean, Palm Springs, I feel like, if we want to talk about it in fashion terms, Palm Springs is, late 60s, early 70s influence, maybe a colorful caftan or, bright colors and sort of like cocktails by the pool kind of vibe. And the high desert is, it's the high desert. I would say that, the most sensible shoes to wear in the high desert is probably a boot because it's so dusty up there. I think it has a little bit of maybe a Marfa type vibe. And it also can get really cold at night in the high desert. And so, not that doesn't happen in Palm Springs, but it's more, the climate is more extreme, I would say. I would feel more comfortable wearing neutral colors in the high desert and bright colors in Palm Springs.
Okay, well, that makes sense. And you did mention that you have a house in Sea Ranch, but I think you also have one in Palm Springs.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear about that house and sort of how you spend your time in Palm Springs.
Jonathan and I bought that house in 1998, which was sort of early on in terms of the renaissance of Palm Springs. What had happened there was that the interest in the desert had sort of moved away from Palm Springs. So there were a lot of mid-century homes in Palm Springs that kind of remained untouched. And so, starting in the late 90s, people started buying these houses and restoring them. And there became this whole movement of, I would say, lots of creative types from all over the place buying these homes. Our house is not exactly what you think of as the stereotypical Palm Springs house. I think people imagine, walls of glass, perhaps a butterfly roof, sort of a one-story, low-slung kind of home. And ours is a 1936 streamlined modern house. And it came with a name. It's called the Ship of the Desert. And we did a major restoration on it. And it's a beautiful house.
Yeah. And I know you've been over the years interested in vintage shopping. To me, Palm Springs is one of the best places I've ever gone vintage shopping.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if that is the case and if there are certain places that you love, not just in Palm Springs, but other places to shop for vintage.
For vintage clothing and vintage home furnishings, Palm Springs is great. There are more and more vintage stores, and I think it's a really good resource. Los Angeles is good too, but Palm Springs is just more compact, so it's easier to get around and get to all the places. I mean, the other place that I love to go vintage shopping is in West Palm Beach. There's that along the Dixie Highway, there's that whole strip of vintage furniture stores that is a lot of fun. So I mean, both of those places are great. I'm just in Palm Springs a lot, so I know the lay of the land and all the shops out there.
This is Passport to Everywhere. We'll be right back after the break.
This is Passport to Everywhere. I'm your host, Melissa Biggs Bradley. Today I'm speaking with designer Trina Turk, known for her bold and vibrant namesake brand. Listen as we discuss how she turned her 1995 women's contemporary line into an iconic lifestyle label, and how travel influences her dynamic designs. Plus, with California on our minds, stay tuned for today's Indagare Insight, where I'll reveal my favorite tips for an amazing road trip all along the California coast.
Passport to Everywhere with Melissa Biggs Bradley continues. Listen to new episodes every Thursday on all podcast platforms.
I'd love to hear about your boutiques and the design of them, and whether those have been influenced by the homes that you've restored.
I think that the boutiques have been more influenced by, I mean, there's sort of this overall aesthetic of the brand, which is very much inspired by late 60s, early 70s Palm Springs. But we have taken into account sort of the regions where the stores are. In fact, in Naples, Florida, we went for a slightly more tropical vibe. And yeah, I think that there's the brand aesthetic, but then we also want to not forget about where we are.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I know you have been inspired, by your travels, and you're an avid traveler. So I'd love to hear about some of the places that you love to go.
Well, this year, I traveled a lot this year so far. I went to Japan. My mom's Japanese. And so I've been to Japan multiple times, but it's always amazing. The food is incredible. Every time I go, I understand my mother a lot better. And, just the kind of mix of something very chaotic, just like walking down the street in Tokyo can be very chaotic. And then all of a sudden you'll turn around a corner and there's like this beautiful garden that is super serene. And I guess that's how Japanese people deal with sort of the crowded nature of their cities. So Japan is always incredible. I went with some friends from Palm Springs who are sort of interested in architecture. I went to Helsinki, Oslo, Copenhagen, and Stockholm. We did sort of Scandinavian capitals. And that was really interesting too, from a design standpoint. And there are actually a lot more similarities between Scandinavian design and Japanese design than you really necessarily realize. But it was really interesting to be in Japan and then be in Scandinavia right after that, just because everything was sort of like fresh in my mind. I went actually with Jonathan Adler and Simon Doonan. I met up with them in Rome, and we went to Capri in September. And then I parted ways with them, and I rented a car and I drove around Puglia by myself for a week, which was so great. And it's just very laid back and a little bit slower, I would say, than these kind of heavily touristed parts of Italy. So it was really great just because the pace was a little slower. And then Mexico City, I've been several times, but there is so much to see in Mexico City. And, you could be there for months and do something different every single day. I mean, to me, Mexico City is, just as exciting as Paris, really, in terms of like the history and the culture and everything that's going on there. It's so dynamic, and I love going to Mexico City.
I completely agree. And it's not even just in Mexico City itself. When you start spending time there, you realize how many places nearby have a lot of really exciting things going on, whether it's Oaxaca or San Miguel, and there's just so much in that area. It's fantastic.
And yeah, for for people who live in Los Angeles, it's super easy to get to Mexico City or any of the places that you mentioned. And I just think that Mexico is incredible. And we're on some level, I feel like Americans are always running off to Europe, and Mexico is right there.
Well, and it's not even just Mexico. I completely agree with you, but all of Central and America. I was in Guatemala last year, and the richness of the history and the artisanship and the different kinds of traditions and cultures, it's just fascinating, and it's so near. So going back to LA, can you describe a favorite day in LA?
Oh, yeah. I guess the favorite day in LA would involve an architectural tour for me. An architectural tour and a flea market. That would be like my perfect day. Um, even after living in LA since 1985, there's so many incredible houses here. And I've been on many, many tours, but there's always more to see.
And are there one or two houses that are open to the public to visit that you love, that you would recommend to somebody to go and visit?
Yeah, I would love to recommend the Hollyhock House, which is in Hollywood. It's a Frank Lloyd Wright house, but it was really the construction of it was really overseen by Rudolph Schindler. And it's in Barnstall Park. It's open to the public, and you can walk all around the house and in the house. So that's a really great tour. Also in Pasadena, I mean, my focus of interest in architecture is mid-century, but the Gamble House, which is an arts and crafts house, is in Pasadena. And I think that house is important because it sort of leads the way to what became mid-century modernism. And also the woodworking and the detail in that house is just incredible. So those are two that are open to the public that are great to see.
Fantastic. And what about flea markets? Are there markets in the LA area that you love?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Pasadena City College is the first Sunday of the month. The Rose Bowl is the second Sunday of the month. The Long Beach Flea Market is the third Sunday of the month. Out in the desert, during the season, the Palm Springs Vintage Market is on the first Sunday of the month. It goes from October to May. All of those are great.
Oh, that's fantastic. Do you have a approach to flea market shopping? I have some friends who will say, today I'm only looking at costume jewelry, or I'm on the hunt for, mini dresses from the 1960s, and that's going to be my focus. Otherwise, it gets too chaotic. Do you have a method for flea market shopping?
No. I mean, what I've found over the years is that if you're looking for something, you don't find it. Like if you're looking for a very specific thing, you don't find it. I just look at everything and, see what strikes my fancy. And, a lot of times I will buy garments for work inspiration. Sometimes I'll be shopping personally. I just like to see what's out there.
And what about when you have friends who visit LA? Are there certain shops or restaurants that you tend to steer them to for that quintessential dose of California?
Well, there's a place that's close to my house. I live in Los Feliz, and there's a taco place called Salazar that is super low key. It's set up in what used to be an auto body shop, so it's all outdoors. And I love to take them there because I think people associate Los Angeles with tacos, and they're very good tacos and other things as well. But that's just right by my house, so that's a favorite. Let's see. I'm an East Sider, so I love. There's an Italian restaurant in Echo Park that's called Bicchetti that I really love.
That sounds great. And so going back to your brand and to fashion, in terms of how you've seen the industry evolve over the years and what you're expecting for your own brand, what are some of the things that you have seen as welcome changes, and what are some of the things that may concern you?
Well, the business is completely different than it was when we started in 1995. It's really, it's changed dramatically. And the biggest change, of course, is the shift from brick and mortar retail to online shopping. I sort of am feeling now that, there might be a swing back towards brick and mortar because it's much more fun, I think, to shop for clothes in person when you can touch them and feel them and try them on and not have to return the ones that you don't like when you actually see them in person. So I do think that hopefully is due for an upswing. I mean, as far as I would say, e-commerce is the biggest change, and social media. And I guess the other thing that's different is, you used to have to depend on those big retailers to sort of get you off the ground, which is certainly what we did in the mid 90s when we started. Getting into specialty boutiques and department stores was really, that was the way to gain traction. And now I think it could be that, which, is a wholesale business, or it could be direct to consumer through an e-commerce site. And what I've seen over the years is, we used to be 100% wholesale. And as, things have progressed, now our own direct to consumer business is a bigger part of our business than wholesale. So it's almost like, it's sort of slowly shifted. And our own direct to consumer would be our stores and our website. So, that's really been the biggest shift, is just that, dramatic shift in how people shop.
And for you, how have you adapted the brand, or how do you foresee continuing? Because you did open a direct to consumer store in Naples.
Well, we're looking to do, at the height, we had 12 shops. We closed many of them during COVID, just because, during the shutdown, it was sort of like we were not allowed to conduct business. So we shut a lot of them. And now I think it's a matter of sort of building that back up again. So yeah, I think that stores are super important because a customer can walk in and kind of get the feeling of the brand just by walking into the store. I think that the best location for that would be our Palm Springs store, which we consider our flagship. It's expanded a couple of times over the years. And so it's a large store that gives you the kind of full breadth of the brand.
Yeah. And for women who are aspiring to go into the fashion world today, do you have any advice you could offer them?
I do think that it's important to know how to construct garments. Over the years, I've mentored at some of the design schools, and sometimes the students want to be a fashion designer, but they don't want to be bothered with knowing how to sew or make a pattern. And I think that both of those things are extremely important. I would say that the most important thing is to, have an idea for what your brand represents and how it's different from what's already out there, and really, know about how a garment is constructed, how to make a pattern, and you have to have a general understanding of textiles too.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true with anything. You should really understand the fundamentals of whatever craft you're practicing. And then you can innovate and use new modern technology. And I know, Trina, that you have been involved with a lot of different philanthropic efforts within your communities. And I'd love to hear about some of the causes that you're passionate about.
Well, I'd say the number one cause that I'm super interested in is architectural preservation. And just because I think that, the historic architecture of both LA and Palm Springs kind of make them what they are. And it's very easy to tear down old buildings, but it seems that, especially in Los Angeles, what is built in place of it is never really as good as what was taken down. I mean, there are exceptions. So that's just been something that I've been really interested in ever since I moved to LA and became involved with the Los Angeles Conservancy. And that's really how I've learned a lot about architecture too, is through all the tours, both in Los Angeles through the LA Conservancy, and then in Palm Springs there's the Palm Springs Modern Committee, which I'm on the board of. Also, the Palm Springs Art Museum has done a lot of programming around architecture, and it's really become kind of like my number one hobby outside of work, is just learning about architecture, and not only in California, but obviously everywhere I go.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that is such a wonderful, almost vocabulary or language to learn about a place. And so like you, I've been lucky to spend some time in Scandinavia looking at architecture, but also in other cities in Europe and in Mexico City, which we just talked about. I mean, one of the great ways to understand Mexico City and to understand how it's different from so many other places is through Luis Barragan's architecture or other people's architecture. And so I think it's just, to me, it's a language that you learn to read that gives you a clue into a different destination.
Well, and also I think that, fashion and architecture and art, the whole culture of design is, it's just all one big design project, and it has its variations. But I guess I think that's really what life is. It's like one big design project. So learning about what's going on in all these other places, it just makes you a more informed citizen of the world.
Yeah. And as you said, like, in the mid-century modern of Palm Springs, what that architecture expresses is so much about the language of America and what it was going through at that moment, and particularly in California. So these are these design projects of life, and they express what's happening in a culture at that moment, whether it's the clothes or the architecture. So do you have favorite hotels? I should have asked you this earlier, in Palm Springs and LA. I mean, I can guess which one it is in Palm Springs, but please tell me.
Well, the thing is that I know the hotels in Palm Springs as someone who visits the hotels but doesn't stay in the hotels, because I have a house out there, so I never stay in the hotels. I mean, I think you're probably thinking of the Parker, which Jonathan designed. And I think that the Parker is a great experience. I think that people coming to Palm Springs like to go to the Parker because they know of it. They've seen photos of it. I think it's a really great expression of, the Palm Springs lifestyle. But there's a whole bunch of new little hotels that have popped up, or old hotels that have been redone in Palm Springs. And so there's a lot going on out there.
I would love to know, if you think about your brand, what legacy you would like to have it represent. If you look at the whole history of the brand and where it's going, what do you want it to mean to people?
I think it should represent California optimism. And I think that it does. I just think that, there's something about being here and something about wearing color that can really enhance your mood. So I would say that would be it.
Fantastic. And do you have any destinations that are on your bucket list, places you still want to go and see?
Well, I haven't explored any part of South America, and so I would love to go there. I mean, it's a huge continent, so I'd have to narrow that down a little bit. But I'd love to go to Argentina.
Well, and you know what? I'll tell you, I love Argentina, but as a Californian who loves color and loves beaches, I would almost say Brazil or Peru will steal your heart. They've just got great beach scenes, great color, great joy, great diversity. They're amazing.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. And of course, I'm always interested in textiles everywhere I go. And I know that Peru in particular has some incredible textiles.
Amazing textiles. So if you had to sum up what you think the greatest gift of travel has been for you, what would you say that is?
I think that the greatest gift of travel is just seeing how other people live. And, I think that the interesting thing is really the differences. when you go to foreign countries and, there's Starbucks and McDonald's or whatever parts of American culture have seeped in, like, to me, that's what you want to avoid. And I think that the interesting thing is the differences. And also, of course, I'm always interested to see what people are wearing, and just how people live and how it's different from what's going on here.
Well, thank you so much, Trina. It's been a total treat. You've made me even more inspired to return to California and explore some of the places that I don't know at all, and return to some of the places that it's been way too long.
That was fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks to Trina Turk for joining me today and for sharing her creative perspective on the world of fashion. To see her beautiful designs for yourself, check out trinaturk.com and follow her on Instagram at Trina Turk. You can find our latest Indagare article where Trina shares her favorite insider California intel at indagare.com. If all this talk of California has you ready to visit the Golden State yourself, I've gathered the top hotels and stops for your next road trip adventure, coming up on today's Indagare Insight.
Here are this week's Indagare Insights.
In honor of Trina's California roots and the fact that the Golden State is a major source of inspiration for her, I want to highlight the classic California road trip in our Indagare Insight today. I'll start by saying that one of my biggest tips for doing it right is to head south. That is, start from San Francisco, or if you have time, start even further north with a food and wine retreat in Napa or Sonoma, at the Farmhouse Inn, Meadowood, or Auberge de Soleil. Whether it's the city or the winelands, work your way down the coast instead of the reverse to ensure the best views. The first leg of your journey will weave through the fertile Santa Clara Valley, which happens to be the artichoke capital of the world. So be sure to stop for a meal and order artichokes. From there, you'll hit Monterey, which brings me to my next tip: plan in advance. Monterey is home to a world-class aquarium, and especially if you're traveling with kids, you'll want to see it. But you do need to buy tickets in advance, especially for any of the special access tours. When I visited a number of years ago, my son did the underwater explorer dive in the tidal pool, and he loved it. It allows children aged 8 and up to do a surface scuba dive in full gear with an aquarium staff member. You'll also want to explore the charming Carmel by the Sea, a 20th century arts colony with several fabulous restaurants, and it's only 15 minutes from Monterey by the scenic 17-mile drive. Since there's so much to see and do along this part of the trip, you may want to stay for a day or two, and my next piece of advice is to choose your hotels wisely. We have plenty of in-depth hotel reviews on our website at indagare.com, and I'll mention a few of our favorites for this part of the trip now. The lodge at Pebbled Beach is obviously famous for its renowned golf course, but it's also a wonderful option for families. It has a beach club, golf and tennis academies, an equestrian center, a spa, and more. The resort also has a smaller boutique property tucked between said spa and the first hole of the golf course called Casa Palmero. It has just 24 rooms that are more luxurious than those at the Pebble Beach complex. If this is not a family trip for you, I'd instead recommend that you continue on to Big Sur and check out one of our 2 adults-only hotels that we love, Post Ranch Inn and Ventana Big Sur. Just make sure that you book dinner at the Post Ranch Inn weeks in advance if you decide to stay at either one of these. Whether you opt for a hotel here or not, leave plenty of time for the Big Sur Drive. One of America's most iconic stretches of road is Highway 1, which runs from just south of Carmel and stretches along the region known as Big Sur. There are plenty of lookout points along the drive, but the road is narrow, winding and only 2 lanes, so traffic moves slowly. You'll also want to take advantage of stops along the way to stretch your legs and to take it all in. The views are amazing. One stop I love is Big Sur Bakery, which is the perfect place for breakfast, coffee, lunch, or dinner en route to activities in the Julia Pfeiffer State Park or a walk on Pfeiffer Beach. The park is 37 miles south of Carmel, and I recommend you walk the half-mile trail to see the view of the McWay Falls, which have an 80-foot drop to the sea below. Then drive down to the beach itself and take a walk around the formations of Keyhole Arch, but go early to ensure parking. Plus, it could be windier than you expect, so plan accordingly. There are 10 state parks within Big Sur and lots of great hikes, and you can follow trails on your own Or you can work with one of our team to be paired with a good hiking guide from the region. For conservationists, one of the country's greatest success stories can also be witnessed in Big Sur. As recently as the late 1980s, there were fewer than 30 condors left in the wild. But the California Condor Recovery Plan has managed to increase their population to 300, and many of the massive birds can be seen circling overhead at mile marker 41, so keep an eye out. Then continue to drive Highway 1 to Cambria, which is what I think is the most beautiful stretch of the entire journey. On the way, pay a visit to Hearst Castle, one of the most fascinating private residences ever built in America. Again, you should book your tour in advance because there are lots of options, and that way you have your spot reserved when you arrive. And to all the meat lovers listening in, be sure to pick up steaks from Hearst Ranch. They're among the best you'll find. For road trippers who either opt not to begin in wine country or who might crave more than one wine-focused stop along the way, be sure to budget time for a detour from the coast and add Paso Robles to your itinerary. The small cowboy town is reminiscent of a 1970s Napa and is such a fun addition. The region specializes in Rhone varietals, specifically Grenache and Syrah. Plus, if you're heading south to Santa Barbara or Los Angeles, you may want to cut over here to the 101 just south of Cambria anyway, since the most scenic part of Coastal Highway 1 is to the north, and you'll save yourself some time. I'll end my tips for this road trip with suggesting you round out your journey with some relaxing beach time in Santa Barbara, where my favorite hotels are the San Ysidro Ranch and Rosewood Miramar Beach, which boast a 500-foot beach of its own. Of course, Ojai, Malibu, Los Angeles, Laguna, and San Diego lie further south, but we'll save those for another episode. Whether you incorporate all of this advice or just some of it into your exploration of the California coast, I hope you enjoyed tuning in. Be sure to check out Indagare.com for additional road trip advice, hotel reviews, restaurant recommendations, and much more. And don't forget to sign up for our free weekly newsletter where we share the latest travel news and trends. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Passport to Everywhere. I hope you loved hearing Trina's insights and that her story leads to fashion discoveries of your own. For more on style guides and packing lists, head to Indagare.com. Coming up on Passport to Everywhere, I'll be speaking with master tea blender and Art of Tea founder, Steve Schwartz, about his brand and blends inspired by his worldly travels. Join us in spreading the love for travel by rating and reviewing us on Apple and Spotify. And please send all your questions, suggestions, and ideas to passport@indagare.com. Your feedback helps us fuel the journey. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us at Passport to Everywhere.
We hope you'll join the journey and subscribe. For more travel inspiration, visit Indagare.com. Indagare. This has been Passport to Everywhere.